people are just often closer to being homeless than they realize. And it reminded me of the time that I slept in the homeless shelter at City Team right when I started at the company, before anybody really even knew who I was. I decided to I realized I didn't know much about homelessness at all. I'd never been homeless or addicted, and here I was now working for a ministry that helps homeless and addicts and people who are just, really at the bottom. And so I decided that I would just go in and immerse myself in that world, even just for a short time, and stay over in the shelter. I didn't shave even for longer than I have it now, and I wore the oldest like paint clothes that I had. And I just went down to the rescue mission, and in the afternoon I lined up outside like the homeless do right there in San Jose. I stood in line, and because I was a newbie, or a first timer as they're called, I got preference. So I was in one line, and then others who are sort of there more frequently or chronically, they're in another line, and it's just based on availability. And one thing that struck me that I want to share with you is that there was an Indian guy who was in front of me, and people kind of came over and talked to me a little bit because I was like a new guy, and I'm young, and they just were saying like, how'd you get here? Like, why are you here? And I got a chance to ask that of a guy that was right in front of me, this Indian guy. A lot of people who work in this field have said it's pretty typical of how someone becomes homeless, so I thought it was worth sharing. This guy actually worked at Intel, so he was an engineer at one of the top tech companies in the San Francisco Bay Area, and this was a job that he held a lot of pride in. And in fact, his family, he told me, most of them were still back in India. When he got this job and was able to move to America, he was the man. And so when he was laid off and lost his job unexpectedly, happens pretty often, especially in emerging industries, he took it really, really hard. And his wife, who he lived with, saw him start to drink and become very depressed, and he just couldn't handle it. And there's a common theme with folks who end up homeless, that something happens in life, the death of a family member, loss of a job, some kind of abuse, something that happened in their childhood that they just can't handle. And so this guy couldn't handle the loss of this job, and he just started to drink, and eventually became unmanageable. His wife kicked him out of the house, couldn't live with him anymore, and he lived with a friend for a while. Same thing. Eventually his behavior resulted in him being kicked out of that situation, slowly just burning these bridges of the closest people to him. Ended up living in his car, and then told me that eventually through not paying upkeep on the car, not keeping it registered, getting tickets, the car was eventually towed away. And he told me the first day that he was homeless on the street, he thought, all right, this is just going to be a day or two until I figure things out. And what happens is, as he was on the street each day, it started to sink in that this might be this might be his reality. He started to lose hope, he told me. And by the time I talked to this guy, he said he'd been on the street for 3 years, homeless. And again, just imagine someone from tech, engineer, well-educated, well-compensated, going down the ladder, so to speak, to eventually being in essentially the gutter, and then all kinds of things start to happen in that place. Where, I'll give you an example, he had gotten some eczema, a rash, a very common rash on his arm. In fact, I occasionally get it myself. He got eczema, but normally you treat it and it goes right away. Well, he left untreated. This stuff now covered a large part of his body. I got to see that when I checked in and then showered. Everybody takes a shower at City Team, and I showered with that guy and many others, and you just see the disease and the rashes and the amputations and the things on the street there that are pretty sobering. But I thought that story was pretty telling about how there's this progression that often happens that lands people on the street. Homelessness looks different than I thought. That there's guys out there working that you're interacting with during the day that you don't even know are homeless, that are homeless, and the reason sometimes is really as selfless as it can get. I mean, this guy just wants to make memories with his kids when they come visit, and so he stays homeless for that reason. And my hope and my prayer really in sharing this stuff is that you start to break down in your mind any stereotypes or barriers around homelessness and the people you see on the street, the panhandlers, and that you're not afraid of them, that you start to think about how you can actually look them in the eyes and that you can minister to them, that you don't think you have the answer, but you can actually look at them as a human being, that you can love them, even get to a place where you can serve them, where you can consider them, where you can even get to a place where you get to hear some of these stories. I fell into a job. I feel like God put me in a job for a few years where I worked in homelessness and I worked on the street, and I got to hear a lot of these stories, and they're incredible, and it changes your life, changes the way you look at life, changes the way you look at other people around you. And as a Christian, this is on you to do this. I don't think that you can say, I write a check to my church and we serve the poor, therefore I serve the poor. I don't think it works that way. I think the scripture calls us each to minister to the poor outside of our home. And maybe you now have isolated yourself from poverty and you live in a community that's gated, or it's far from the poor of your town or your city. But I actually believe it's on you to find this stuff and to minister wherever you're able and wherever you're called, at least a couple times, to start to give God a chance to reveal Himself to you in that struggle. Okay, He does say in Matthew, he talks about, when you give, and I think also in Mark, he talks about when we minister to those who don't have food or clothing or a drink, that we're actually ministering to Him. That's Jesus talking. So I think that writing a check or supporting a ministry doesn't cut it. I feel like we all need to do this stuff. So I hope that this comes across that way. I hope it blesses you. I hope it challenges you a little bit. And I hope ultimately that you do something about it. All right. Great talking, sharing this story. Let God get the glory, and have a great day.